This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Good evening. This is the City Council Ordinance meeting for April 1st, 6 p.m. I want to welcome everybody to this meeting. We're actually using another computer, so we have that. So welcome everybody. Just to start the meeting, we received some meeting minutes for the last meeting. I'll take a motion to approve those.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Any discussion? None. All right. Get that out of order. Make sure that's here. Just 1 second.
Just so I can screen share it.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Great. So the mayor's obviously not here. If there's anybody for public speak, you can speak now. All right, so we have public speak going. Is anyone here for public speak? Does anyone have any comments that they want to say? Yep.
Hello, my name is Sean Abbott. I live at 21 Summer. Just wanted to pass along really quick can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Pass along a response to one of the commenters last time who had a concern about the aquifer. Just wanted to note that the two major issues with draining aquifers are industry and agriculture. And even among residential properties, the biggest drain on water tends to be large lawns. So lawn care is the biggest residential usage of water. So from that standpoint, doing density should actually alleviate those concerns. As well as that, large lawn care pumps over 10 times the amount of poisons in the form of herbicides and pesticides into our groundwater as even agriculture does. It's far and away the highest use of pesticides and herbicides. So if we want to protect our aquifer, then this zoning ordinance reform is exactly what we need. If you both want to protect the aquifer and also believe that housing is a human right and we should be doing what we can to expand and make housing more affordable, then exactly what we want are these ordinance reforms. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Anyone else for public speak? Yes. Okay, great. So thank you everyone for being here this evening. Forgot to grab my glasses. So I want to start this evening just going back over what we discussed at the last meeting initially, just to, I think we had some questions about whether or not certain language had to be included within this. So I'd like to start there if we can, and then if there were any other comments, questions that people had, particularly from the committee, if there were things that you all had additional thoughts now that we've had a bit of time to kind of think about those. So our planning director, Allison Manuel, is here. Did you have any thoughts or comments about what needed to be included in the language?
Yeah, so I was able to kind of dig into the statute and the regulations to see what was required, and the only item that's in what's being proposed that does need to remain is 7.464, which is the first suggested change in the fair housing portion.
7.464, you said?
Mhm.
Yes.
And that pertains to the way that maximum rents or maximum sale prices are calculated for affordable units.
Mhm.
And it is a requirement of the state's regulation. And the particular language that's in there came directly from the state's guidelines, and it appears in many, if not all, other communities,
Mhm.
40R zoning regulations. But everything else was fine.
All right, so nothing else needed to be included because there were other things, but just to be clear, those things are
Yep.
to be included.
Mhm.
All right, great. Anything from the committee in terms of what we discussed, in terms of the recommended changes, that the housing partnership, had? And actually, I want to take a step back because we have several people around the table. And so I want to make sure that everyone is clear about who's here. So, Connie Denham, I use she, her pronouns, but also I am on the ordinance committee for city council.
Ben Breger, I'm on the Affordable Fair Housing Partnership.
Jana Tatro from the Affordable Fair Housing Partnership.
Catherine Hancock, I'm just a neighbor up the street. I don't know, is today's meeting have anything to do with short-term housing?
It does not.
Does not. Oh,
No. So tonight, so just for clarification, so tonight's meeting, we are just talking about the zoning changes. And then the next meeting for the short-term rental will
That's
be
right.
on April 14th,
oh,
which is a Monday.
okay. Well, I'm gonna say goodbye.
So sad, but
Hi, I'm John McQuaid. I sit on the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership.
And Tamara Smith, city councilor on ordinance.
Salem Derby, Ordinance Committee.
I don't think I'm on camera. Allison, I'm the planning director.
you want to introduce yourself?
Kewell McQuaid, long-term resident
Okay.
of Easthampton.
Okay, great. Great. So back to the questions about comments that were made and recommendations. Did anyone from the committee have thoughts, suggestions, concerns?
About what we went over.
Yeah, about what we went over.
I don't think so. Not about what we went over.
Okay.
I would clarify though, I know, because I think maybe I'm the one that brought up the aquifer. My concern is not use of water
Mm-hmm.
of the aquifer. My concern is, non-permeable surfaces above the aquifer,
Mm-hmm.
that impact the quality of drainage into the aquifer. That's my concern. So higher density would create more non-permeable surfaces over the aquifer. I'm not okay with that.
Mhm.
So I just want to, that's why I was thinking overlay, like an aquifer overlay or something, if we were gonna, so we don't have to spot zone things, but that was just one of the thoughts. Because I think that actually the aquifer, we were looking at a potential overlay for the aquifer could potentially match up with a wildlife corridor. I think they're pretty similar.
Mhm.
So, but it's not all encompassing. So I don't want it to, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think, this is really important, but I just want to make sure that we're being cognizant of, how much density is over the aquifer basin drainage and in that wildlife corridor. Those are my only two things. So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right, great. So we will not throw the baby out with the aquifer water.
Aquifer water.
Okay,
Right? Because
Great.
it's really cool and nice.
that's right.
It's the best tasting water in the country.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Counselor Smith, did you have comments?
So I had a comment, I didn't quite see it in the report, but because this would deal with precinct 5 specifically, we don't have any sidewalks in the neighborhood. And so that when we're looking at how far away from the street and everything, did you consider any of that as you were talking? Just what that would mean for walkability within our neighborhood? Because a lot of the report really talks about the walkability of the neighborhood and how we should be doing that. And for me, one of the biggest concerns I have in there is that part. And I'm not sure if that would be considered. It, you know what I mean? It's not housing per se, but it would affect some of these measurements and everything in housing. So just wanted to bring that up. You get your thoughts on it.
Can I respond briefly? Yeah, so I 100% agree. I think the sidewalk, there's two parts to it. One part of it is that is impervious surface, potentially. The second part of it, I think, is I'm not totally confident that I understand the legal quagmire that is like getting easements or like enforcing sidewalk protection or like what it looks like to add sidewalks in a neighborhood. I know that that can be really controversial and sort of a third rail. So I think that that's sort of why we didn't wade into that too much. But like I do agree that, you know, I live in the Plains too. Like I would love sidewalks. It's like one of my main concerns walking around, but yeah.
Very, very specifically made me worry because it was talking so much about the walkability, particularly for older adults and neighborhood walkability. So our precinct is probably more far removed from the rest of the city than the others. And so the idea of having a small cafe or a small something within there, I am for that. I'm just worried from a safety perspective of what that would visually look like within the neighborhood.
I'm a builder, so I don't know all the exact setbacks depending on different parts of the town or city. City. I've been here so long, there's a town. That could really affect somebody's lot size.
Right.
To be able to build that. So I don't know if there can be some sort of easement or some kind of thing where if you did give that to a sidewalk, maybe the setbacks are changed.
Yeah. So yeah, there's something to consider.
And you have your
Sure. Yeah, I guess we don't need to go down that whole sidewalk tangent. But just to add, I would say, one, I think I would be curious to know what the roadway width is for on average in the Plains, because more likely than not, you could probably shave 3-4 feet off each side of the roadway width and add sidewalks into the road as opposed to taking people's private property, which would be preferable. And secondly, too, to your point about like encouraging private development, like especially at the state level, there's a lot of grants that go into like roadway infrastructure for like if there's like a cafe or a new business coming into an area, being like, hey, let's leverage that private investment to build that, to get grant money to build out like pedestrian infrastructure like that. So it could actually like spur that type of investment even as well. So
I like that idea, even if it was just like on the side of the actual road, like the green bike lane, so that people who are walking know
and
that's
it encourages slower speeds too if the road is a bit more narrow as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go down that too far down that tangent, but I also
I
from a
can
city
probably answer most of it.
yeah
Most of it. So the right of way versus the edge of pavement are two different things. So the right of way you could consider an easement. In most cases, it is an easement, and the right of way is wider than the like paved road. And in the vast majority of cases, you could fit a sidewalk within the right of way without having to take an easement, an additional easement from property owners. There's probably some unique circumstances that isn't true, but more often than not, that would be the case. And I think probably the average road width, I can do a quick measurement. Like newer subdivision roads, usually it's a 60-foot right of way with a 40-foot pavement width, if not 30. It really kind of depends. But I'm just going to do a quick, just like a really quick measurement, which is not going to be exact, but it'll give you an idea.
pretty quick.
Yeah, so I'm looking at like 30. 30 feet is probably what's there. And again, you've got much more than that to work with.
So I think that's a great question, and it comes back to your point, right, about impervious surface, right? So we're up against accessibility and wanting to maintain that and protect the aquifer, right? So I think that those are good questions that we should be kind of thinking about that I don't think we're going to solve tonight, right? But I think that that's something that we should be considering. Okay? So if there's any other questions that you had about what we discussed last time.
And I just want to apologize. I know I wasn't at the meeting last time and that wasn't something that we were discussing last time. So
Yeah.
I kind of went out of the way there. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think these are all good questions, right? Any comments about community character? No. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with the comments.
Mhm. Great. So let's tonight start to talk about, I think it's section 5, creating flexibility in land use. I think all of this we're going to come back to, but I think it's just helpful for us to kind of like go through it so that you all can have comment in terms of what you were thinking. And then it allows us to kind of go back and think and have questions and possibly talk to DPW or the planning department, et cetera. So maybe you could walk us through kind of the next kind of section.
I'm going to ask Kayam or Ben to do the next section because this is their sort of more of their area of expertise than mine. So I don't know.
I'm going to start this broader overview. If
Yeah.
you know more of the details, but
And I just want to remind, if you
Yeah.
just
Yes.
speak up
Yeah.
a little bit so that we get it on the table.
so yeah, I think the sections 5 and beyond are kind of the heart, if you will, of the proposal. It's kind of where there's the most like substantive changes. And the way I've been thinking about them are kind of in 3 kind of buckets, if you will, or broader parts. One is around duplexes, and our recommendation is to make duplexes by right. Let me just make sure. Yep, by right in all zoning districts throughout the city, and also making the conversion of a 1-family dwelling to a 2-family dwelling by right in all districts. I'm just double checking what we said. And I think the logic behind that is just recognizing that, you know, if you drive around the city, it's pretty hard to tell the difference between a duplex and a single family home in the vast majority of cases. If you look closely, maybe you can see 2 electric meters, maybe you see 2 mailboxes, but in general, they really do have the same impact, like visually, on the city that a single family, then I would say a modest sized single family house would. And so by that logic, yes, you're housing a few more people. Are you saying to talk out, speak a little bit?
No, I was asking if you wanted to share the.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Basically, by permitting them by right, it's the city recognizing that, we're adding incrementally a bit more density and giving people the ability to build slightly denser on their lot, and that it doesn't have that much more of an impact on the aesthetic or physical qualities of the city than a single family would. A lot of cities and towns are moving in this direction. It's kind of an incremental and logical next step from allowing ADU by right, because it's basically the same thing, especially like an ADU that's self-contained within a single family home is basically a duplex, just there's more regulations on the size of the ADU. So it just makes sense to allow the the duplexes by that logic. The next recommendation is for mixed uses in residential zone, basically to allow small, low impact commercial uses, markets, smaller supermarkets, bakeries, delis. We have other things in here, photography studios, potters, sculptors, little like stores that you would expect to, don't necessarily have to be downtown, but could just make for, increase commercial activity in other parts of town to make areas have more destinations and walkable. We'll get into more details about that. And then
by special permit.
Yeah, by special permit. And then the third recommendation, which is probably the most substantial, is creating flexibility in dimensional regulations across town. And the logic here is recognizing that the way the city has been built historically and the existing, legacy we have in the city of lot sizes and home sizes don't really match what's in the zoning now. like I think the big takeaway is most of what's existing now is illegal to be built under the current zoning code. And so what's happening is it's freezing existing vacant lots out of development, and two, it's encouraging larger homes to be built on larger lots throughout the city. So that's just like an overview of the three. I think those are kind of like the three main recommendations.
Can you
And
talk about the tax for buildings?
yes.
That was included in that.
Okay, I would say, yeah, 3B, or maybe the fourth kind of section as well, is there's currently a cap of maximum of 18 units per building for multifamily homes. And our recommendation is to lift that cap, recognizing that there's a lot that goes into developing multifamily houses, and there's a lot that developers have to take into account, such as, fixed costs of infrastructure, elevators, stairs, everything that goes into developing a multifamily home multifamily structure, and giving developers, I guess, the responsibility or the more empowerment to, kind of determine how many units can reasonably build. And there's also so many other building and health code issues that kind of go into, setting that cap, if you will, and how many units can be built. So we thought that the city having this 18 unit cap felt arbitrary and not necessarily. Yeah. So I know kind of knows more of like the nitty gritty details. I thought that was just like a helpful overview to start, and I know we can kind of maybe just dig into each one, or however you want to run it.
Yeah. So well, first of all, were there any additional questions that either of you had or the committee had?
No, but and just to, I guess, clarify, for the removing the cap, that wouldn't impact the height restrictions that currently exist, right? So we would be just allowing them to build, I think it depends on the zone, but I think 4 stories is like the maximum.
Yeah.
So we would be allowing them to just build a bigger footprint at that maximum.
Yeah, recognizing that there's still lot area, regulations, there's setbacks, there's, so it's basically just,
We have maximum floor area requirements. There's a ton of other individual regulations in the code that set other limits.
I had a quick question when you were talking in the report and now about having a duplex by right. No restriction on how small the original unit would be. So suppose we had I don't know what the smallest housing residential building is, but are you saying even that one could be split in half to be able to be more than one?
I think you would have to follow all of the same building codes and health regulations. So it would need to have egress. It would need to have space for a kitchen, closets, 2 exits and entrances, all that kind of stuff. And I think it almost gets into the territory of tiny homes, what you're talking about, or an ADU, which is already really small.
My concern, and the reason I bring it up, is that I don't want these only really small home attachments to be suddenly a huge rental market, but actually what is out there to be rented would be far too small for most people to want to comfortably live in. And so it's just in writing it, I was just wondering, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, what Connie said, there's all the building and health code things that go into setting what a minimum lot or unit and I guess housing unit could look like. But I think the current ADU law, I guess I'd be curious to know what the dimensional requirements are for that, because I could see that maybe being more suitable for someone if they wanted to add a backyard cottage or an extension to their house and add a unit in that. They might be able to do that now. But
it's 1,100 square foot cap, I believe, for
max.
max.
Yeah,
exactly.
900.
Oh, is it 9?
Yeah, the state's is 900 or half the square footage of the structure, whichever is less, but we have a more permissive regulation, which is 900, just period. But I do want to just sort of add on to the minimum area requirements for dwelling units. Like the state sanitary code and the building code do have minimums. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but the living area has to meet certain standards.
And I would imagine it's a little market driven. So if I was considering building a duplex as an investment, you make it too small, no one will want to live there. So, I think we're just trying to think of ways to be able to put 2 units on a lot instead of just one. But I think it's a good question. I mean, I think, but I also think the market will dictate what someone could rent it for. If it's too small, then you're impacted on what you get for your rent. And,
So I will say that in other communities, I think that have a stronger or larger refugee immigrant population, that the too small unit thing does become a problem. Families without the means to rent a larger space will take what they can get. But I mean, that's really boils down to more of like an enforcement issue. So more so than availability of like appropriately sized dwellings. So yeah, that's a cost and enforcement.
I think the other thing that some of what this allows too is, I mean, I know that ADUs are being, well, the spirit, I think, was for family to be able to move in there, right? And so I think some of this may also translate into that as well, where you create a duplex and your family member lives on one side and you live on the other, or your kids move into that, or, whatever. So I think that there's that.
Yeah, it's like the counterpoint to, instead of building an ADU, maybe you're living in a 3-bedroom house that now you don't need all the space for it.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a resident who actually is concerned about the aquifer, and they had commented about the idea of turning that single family home into a duplex as opposed to like adding on a second piece of that, but being able to figure out how to split their home into like two sides. And she didn't talk about size. I think she was more concerned about how do we make sure that footprint doesn't expand, right? And then have an impact on the flow of water down to the aquifer, et cetera, right? So I think that those are good questions, because I think as we work through this, I think that's one of the things that we're trying to continue to be mindful of, is how do we continue to fit in, right? Housing while not hurting, right, the future aquifer and whatnot, right? So I think that those are good questions for us to kind of think about.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I know that years ago when I used to work a lot in Amherst, they had a real big problem with people taking their houses and renting rooms. So now they're not technically separate legal, living spaces, they're renting rooms. I know Amherst had a real problem with that for a long time. And then they started doing regulations about family members and all that. I just think, I love the idea of being able to split up a space, but how do you regulate people from just, building boarding homes? With a lot more safety concerns about fire and egress and cooking, that kind of stuff.
Other thoughts, comments?
I have a little bit of a spiel about the aquifer thing, but I don't know when that's a good time.
I think it's fine to talk about it, because I think it's going to be weaved in throughout this entire conversation. So I think it's a theme that we're going to have to continue to come back to, because even though people aren't here, I know they are continuing to talk about it. And they are, I think, in many ways, perhaps waiting until this gets to the planning board before kind of engaging in the conversation. So that's a little bit of an assumption that I'm making, but I think that might be. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a couple things to say. I think, building off sort of what, Sean had to say, I think that in addition to the concerns around just water use, I think the two main concerns that we have with the aquifer, based on my research, are the recharge capacity, and that is mainly a product of, you know, weather, but also impervious surface, and wastewater management, water runoff management, that kind of thing. And then waste disposal, hazardous waste disposal and infiltration, which is mainly regulated through, you know, hazardous material storage regulation, and regulating like disposal of hazardous materials. So all of that currently, all of those regulations currently do exist in our aquifer protection overlay district currently. So I did a little bit of highlighting, just to like add the context to the restrictions that currently exist. So this is section 7.052. So special district regulations in the aquifer protection district. This isn't in there. This is Easthampton zoning ordinance, not the report. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, then can you repeat it to me so I can just have it for the record?
Yeah, section 7.052, prohibited uses. So this is sort of just a list of all of the things that the city restricts, particularly around the concern of the waste infiltration and recharge. I think the two things that are specifically related to the residential use are letter M, which introduces a impervious surface limit. So prohibited is rendering impervious by any means more than 15% or 2,500 square foot of any area of any single lot, whichever is greater, unless a system for artificial recharge that will not result in the degradation of groundwater is provided. And then it provides the best practice guide. So this is mainly for that recharge piece. It sets a limit of 15% of any lot, regardless of the size. So, you know, I was talking to Ben about this. It's like, to me, the idea that we need an acre lot, it's not necessarily logical when like 15% of 1 acre is the same amount of square footage as 15% of 4 quarter-acre lots. You get the same amount of impervious surface. So like the idea that we're having acre lots to protect recharge is, I think, not necessarily sound. What I did find in my research is the idea that we have acre zoning to protect the infiltration, particularly around septic systems. And that was something that I think made a lot of sense. If you're gonna have a septic system on a lot, you want a certain amount of seepage area. But I think in 2007 or the early 2000s, all planes got put on municipal sewer. So a lot of that concern, I think, we have addressed in a lot of ways. So those are just a couple things that I wanted to add to the conversation. And then I also think it's interesting that we do allow by special permit the above ground storage of all hazardous materials and petroleum product, which is incidental to normal household use, outdoor maintenance, or heating of a structure. And I think that that is like an example of something like a harmful use that we allow because it's like necessary to residential use. And like, it's something that we have protections in place that we are following. And that I think that they're relatively effective in like protecting our groundwater. So yeah, that's my spiel.
No, thank you for that. Questions?
I think I would just add to what Kyan said, like just recognizing too that we're coming at this from the housing angle. We're not hydrogeologist by any means, or like, you know, we've done research based on what's available online. There's plenty of resources and research done about the aquifer and what's being done to protect it, what, you know, how it's been performing over the past few years. But certainly by all means, like we love the aquifer and like want it to protect it. Don't want this, if there's unintended consequences of this zoning proposal, we think it's covered by the protection overlay district, but we certainly like want to work with the protection overlay committee and understand like what some of the issues are and kind of work through those.
Yep. So I think at a future meeting, I will invite them in. I think once we have kind of gone through all of this to kind of have a clear, understanding of this. Like, I don't think we're not going to go through the rest of this evening. I don't think, because I'm kind of doing it in chunks. So if we have questions, we can just kind of cover it, and then we can come back and have those questions, and then invite some other folks in here to discuss that, which I think that they will do. I did go to their first meeting, and people were very engaged in the discussion about concerns about the aquifer and what density, the impact of that on, et cetera, et cetera. The committee at that point had not had the opportunity to read the report, so they didn't have at that time comment about it, but I will reach out to them again and kind of have that conversation with them. I think that they're also talking about ADUs and impact of ADUs on the aquifer, et cetera, right? So I think all of that is at some point going to enter into this particular conversation, right? So but they're kind of engaging at their within their committee. You have another question?
Yeah, I'll also just say, like, I say all of that not as I've addressed all your concerns, like you have no right to be upset. Like, this is me saying, here's all the research I've done, here's my understanding. Please tell me if there's any other reasons why we have acre zoning. Like, based on what I've been able to find, here's what I've been able to dig down. And like, from what I can understand, here's how I see it, but I'd be happy to be educated.
Yeah. No, I think we're all open to that, right? I think they also have thoughts too, in terms of like, okay, if we're talking about increasing density, how do you do it in a way that also promotes open space, right? And I think that's a thought process too. Like, okay, if we're going to have a dense space, like how do we do that, but also be mindful of like, okay, how do we create open spaces within the context of that as well, right? So I think that those are great questions.
And I appreciate the clarification. And I think, coming from where I was speaking of it as a concern, I think one of the things that I was imagining as we envision lots and trying to figure out ways to infill, I was thinking in the aquifer protection area, people that have an acre lot, splitting their lot, building, one or two more houses on that parcel, in that particular area, what kind of impact would that have with driveways, with adding new, 1,500 to 2,000 square foot houses in that, so you take maybe one lot and turn it into 4 parcels. And if that infill happens in the entire district, that's kind of, I mean, obviously that would be probably a pretty rare thing maybe, but I just want to make sure that we're thinking of that was where I was coming from. But, and I know, like, I think it was 2008 or 9 that we did the sewage thing. So I think almost all the houses there are on town sewage now, or city sewage now, because there was people that at that time they just put in the septic. So there were people that got like waivers to not connect to the system until they had like got their money's worth. So
I think what's just to piggyback off that, I think what would be interesting, if we're really, focused a little up right now on the aquifer district, is how many vacant lots are there? Because there's not that many.
Right.
I mean, all of Easthampton, there's not very many vacant lots. And so when I think about all of this, I just think of it as like tools in our toolbox. It doesn't mean that every house is going to convert to a duplex. It doesn't mean that every new house that goes up is going to be a duplex. But it just gives us more tools to build more housing. So it would be interesting to think about precinct 5 where I also live, it's like what actually is left to build on? There's not that much. I mean, there are certainly people with bigger lots that could decide to subdivide their lot. Pretty unlikely, I think, in most cases that would happen, but it could happen. But I don't know how easy that is to figure out, but that might be something that we might want to think about to bring to the table when the aquifer committee comes, because then we're talking about like real numbers. Like, okay, well, how many units could it be if every unit turned into a duplex on every vacant space?
I have the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
I thought it was already in there somewhere.
Yeah, so I think that would be helpful to like
To
make
reference.
to like make real, right? Okay, it would be 13 units or, you know,
Yeah.
4 or 5 or
Right. I think the other thing too, just to your comment, I think it's hard to, and it's a good thing you're sitting here. I think when I think about these things, I'm trying to think small footprint, right? And so it concerns me that we're going to split something and then they're going to have a 2,000 square foot house, right? But I would hope that the idea of this is that we're actually encouraging a smaller. That's my.
No, it's the idea,
Yeah.
kind of like the idea of the ADU where
Right.
that's why I get worried when we're putting too much of a value as to what that would.
Right. But the hope is that whatever we do, we're encouraging small footprint, right? So that that appeases some of the other concern about wildlife or the aquifer or, you know, whatever. So I think what we're trying to encourage.
Well, and who knows with the market, what that's going to bring. But I mean, the trend over the last 20 years has been to go bigger.
Right. They have lots.
So,
It's the only way to make money.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
I will say, I think the maximum impervious area is like the ticket, like
Yeah.
to probably address most of the concerns.
Yeah.
Because even if you only have a 900 square foot house, if you decide to put a gigantic patio in the backyard,
Right.
plus a pool, plus, you know, X, Y, and Z, you end up having the same impact as a 2,000 square foot house. So
Control car driveway.
exactly, yeah, I mean, and it does, you know, not all over, but it does happen
Yeah.
sometimes.
That's, I was thinking about, in precinct 5, the lots that do have those really big yards tend to be really big backyards. So it'd be really hard to navigate in there. Right? And one other thing I want to say is that I'll ask questions, not because I'm opposed to it, but because I don't have the language as the expertise that you have. So if I have a real simple question or a question that doesn't make sense to me, it's also asking me to rephrase it in a way so that when I do get asked this by a constituent, I can explain it. And I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that. I'm not trying to challenge anyone's expertise, and I'm aware I can come off that way, and I apologize. I know you did a tremendous amount of work on this, and I really respect your expertise on it. So just
Even if
making
you
sure
were-
everyone knows that.
Even if you were challenging it, like that's totally like
I'm
respectful
aware,
and
but
we're prepared to
I
engage in
know,
that.
I
so.
know, but I don't want that to be interpreted as what I'm doing. That's not where I'm at. So.
I don't want to challenge you. Did I see your hand out of the corner of my eye?
I guess the only thing I would like to input is whatever happens, however these changes are made, what would be great is if it could just mean that somebody could come to the planning board and say, this is, you know, my lot, and I have the perfect one to subdivide it. And, you know, I have a perfect lot, so I have some, you know, stake in this. But if it wasn't just so it wasn't clear cut, you know, this is the regulation. If you don't conform, nothing. You know, and I think that would address the ones that, you know, maybe somebody's trying to do something stupid, you know, but if people were allowed to just, you know, present it and it's not automatically shut down. That's all. That's the biggest thing. And again, you know, I mean, I'm a builder, but I also don't want ugly houses and million things, and, you know, but if it could mean that we could, you know, people could present things and not just get shut down.
We'll counter that to just say that I think it's important for zoning to be predictable in the interest of equity and fairness. And that is easier accomplished by clear-cut rules than the wishy-washy. So I do just want to put that out there. It's
When we also put the planning board in a precarious spot if we're not
well, it's
clear, and we ask them to do too much interpretation. But I mean, I also I think flexibility makes sense in a lot of ways as well. So I mean, I think that there are ways to have clear guidelines that can build in flexibility, I think. And I think that probably some of these can help with that, these recommendations. So
I also think to that point, like bringing more lots into conformity helps address some of that, like ambiguity and arbitrary decision making, particularly at the zoning board. Like the decision, like Max is on the zoning board, so I hear some of the decisions he has to make, and like deciding whether or not this like furthers a nonconformance or it is already a part of a nonconformance, and then like asking all these questions about is it extra detrimental to the neighborhood, and how do you make that decision based on anything other than like how many people show up to complain. So I'll just say that.
So coming back to any other questions or comments about that? Just want to come back to the duplex conversion by Ray. Any immediate thoughts about those? Is this something that
I'm in agreement. I think it's a reasonable request.
Yeah, I really like the idea of residents being able to think this is a big space for me, and how can I make that smaller, right? And so for them to be able to do that. Mixed use in residential zones. I actually thought this was really creative. And I do think it's helpful for a number of reasons. One, just in terms of people not getting into their cars, going downtown, going to Southampton or wherever to do grocery shopping and things like that. And I think the other nice thing about it is it encourages people to walk. It encourages people to interact with their neighbors and things like that. But that's just my initial kind of immediate kind of thought to that. But are there thoughts that you all have, concerns?
I mean, I think we already have a decent amount of this. It's just not conforming. You know, I mean, if you think of, like, for example, South Street and Main Street, we have, College Highway Variety, we have Old Colony Package Store, we have the little gas station right there. It's just not conforming. There's, if you go down Ferry Street, we have a neighborhood liquor store. So we do have some of this, and so I think to bring it into conformity and to maybe encourage some more, I think would be great. So
good.
What is the only one in our? Is it the horse farm? Like, would that be the only business within the residential area? Where's the horse farm?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, like at the end of
Strong.
Oh.
Yeah.
is that a horse farm?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Barn. You're right. That's another business, but yeah.
I can't think of anything in Precinct 5 that.
Sure, people are cutting hair out of their houses or something.
No, but I think that one at the end of the street, because they do brush hogging, hog brushing. I don't know what it's called. and then the other thing they do.
Now I want to know what this is.
Brush hogging.
And then I think it's Legacy Farm, where they work with horses. That's also on there. So yeah, I mean, there's been a history of having businesses in 5 before. I don't know if those were grandfathered in or something, but certainly have been out there before.
Agricultural uses are exempt from zoning, and if they're commercial, actually, it's what makes them exempt. And we're a right to farm community too, so we've definitely got protections there. I did have one recommendation for this section, which is just to expand the maximum square foot building restrictions to some of the other districts. Right now, it just says in the neighborhood business district, supermarket buildings are limited to a maximum of 10,000 square feet of gross floor area. I feel like extending that restriction to some of the residential districts probably makes sense too. And probably not just for supermarkets. I mean, I think in general, you want more reasonably sized commercial structures.
Did you have a
Yeah, I
comment?
was just gonna add one thing too, and
I could tell by the.
I was just, trying to figure out how to frame it. I think one area I could imagine people pushing back on is like, obviously like just creating, if we're thinking about supermarkets especially, or like even anything that's going to generate traffic, car traffic especially. I know this is about creating walking destinations, but inevitably people are going to drive a lot. And I've seen in other towns, cities and towns, is like some element in the zoning to encourage these uses on somewhat main roads, however you want to define that. So you're not putting it on like a very residential road, like deep within a neighborhood, and creating that level. If that's something folks would want as a certain level of, I guess, protection, or just another consideration that might be, it's not something that's in here, but might be something that is considered as almost like preemptive to some concerns I imagine there would be against that. But just an idea. I know that kind of still, like, I know we have to, we want to encourage through this, like, some commercial uses within residential districts, but I think there's a kind of a balance between still wanting it on somewhat of a main road versus like deep within a neighborhood, I guess. I don't know. And just for like transit access, or like, I don't know. It just might make more sense to have it still on somewhat main roads, however you want to define that. But
Call this out.
yeah, I don't know. It's the end of a whole thing.
I mean, that sounds like it would translate more to like a zone change probably
Yeah.
along certain corridors, rather than trying to tease out like what's defined as.
Well, if it does require a special permit, that
That's true.
the placement of it would probably be part of. the
That's a good
parameters.
point, actually. Yeah.
And I have a feeling, if it's on like a little tiny side street, looking to put a big ease just plop in the middle of someone's backyard,
Yeah.
that might not get the permit. But I think it's a good point.
But to your point, hopefully they would get a flat out no. They would go through a process.
There'd be reasoning.
It's funny because I live on Ferry Street,
Uh-huh.
own a building in New City. And in the 30 years I've been here, I've seen 2 bars disappear and a supermarket. There used to be a small supermarket on Parsons. Chico's, and it was a great little place. But I think the vision of having more walkable neighborhoods is great, but I think that will never happen.
Well, it's tough because residential is so lucrative, right? And it's not easy to run a business. It's not easy to sell things to people necessarily. So,
See, that's going to change too with the mill as more of the mills get.
right. Well, and I think that the mills are gonna, building 7, I think is gonna have commercial within it. So there's gonna be some of that as well. So that'll be a natural, hopefully draw for other people coming towards that.
I'll also add, so I was gonna say, I was gonna add maybe a question about the special permit process, about if we could build specific provisions in for commercial uses in residential zones, or do special permit applications all have to be the same? That was just a question I posed to you, but the other thing I wanted to mention was the report does give a nod to the smart growth zoning overlay district that we already have in the zoning. And that could be an alternative path to like set up a couple more corridors where we allow mixed use. And then the third thing that I thought about was, I've been hearing more and more talk about the idea of like ACU, which is like an additional commercial unit, sort of like an ADU, but you want to bake cakes and build a little kitchen off the side of your house, or use a part of your house for a business like that, and getting registered. I don't know a ton about it, but it's just something that I'll add to the conversation.
Well, we do allow home kitchens, so that you can apply for a permit to. That was how, because the small oven people came to us before they had small oven, and we ended up passing that ordinance, and then they just grew too big. So,
They had a big oven.
success story.
So, we have home occupation sections in the zoning ordinance now that addresses some of that. I think that section needs to be looked at again. I think it's a bit outdated. But yeah, they're home occupations. ACU is a new term to me, but I think we have a framework. It just needs updating. For the special permit question, you can write it so that there are specific findings that are required for a particular use. So for example, if it was, what was common is when the recreational marijuana stores were becoming allowed, to have a specific set of findings that the board had to make that were unique to that type of business. So I think there is room to do that.
I'm also thinking a lot about the artists and what happened on Cottage Street. A lot of them I know had to turn to their homes for their workspaces and things like that. And so I could see a lot of them creating what is an ACU, or as you just described it, right? And so
I do think that's allowed now.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm just
It's
thinking
more
about
like
that.
traffic generating
Yep.
occupations that I think that are by special permit.
Like a daycare.
Those are, you can't restrict that. Home daycares.
You can't restrict.
Well,
But
up
it
to a
was
certain
traffic.
size. I guess no home daycares. No, you're right. Home daycares you can. It's like regular childcare centers.
Interesting.
Over amendment.
So I'm looking at the time. It's almost 7. I think these are good conversations for us to kind of pick through and things like that. Kayam, I want to connect with you and go back and actually go into the zoning ordinances and make some of these changes and in the draft form. And so if you and I could work on that, that would be great. And then we can come back and present that to you all for comment and things like that. I want to come back to 6, and then I think the piece that I think is really kind of getting really exciting is the rethinking the districts and things like that. So I think there's opportunity for at the next meeting to really kind of dig into that and have that conversation. So I want to schedule our next meeting since we're all here. It'll be easy for us to find a time for us to meet and find out when folks are available.
Sure. Stack it with the short-term rental.
I don't want to do that. Yeah, I don't want to do that. I think that one might be hopefully winding down a little bit, but
They just changed the budget phase, so did you see that?
I did not see
I
that.
didn't see.
Hold on, let me see if I can find it. I can tell you when those are. There was a little bit of a thing. So it's new city council finance. May 12th, revenue general government. May 13th, public safety. May 19th, public works enterprise, culture and recreation. May 20th, education, debt and interest. And May 28th, final votes. So that's what they're proposing to be the new schedule.
Okay.
That is, yeah, that's not what I have.
No, because I think we had it for like in 2 weeks or.
Yeah, I don't have that email, so if you could forward that to me, that
Yeah,
would be
let me
super
see.
helpful.
Yeah, hopefully Lindsay will send
Yeah, she
to the
should.
department heads.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be probably good to share with the department.
Okay, so you have the dates, so, what about, so are we meeting is there a meeting still on April 28th?
As of, I don't believe that meeting is gonna happen. So I think that we're freed up for that.
Okay, so does the 28th work for people?
Planning on being here for that. So
That's the first time that's ever happened. Okay, so why don't we do the 28th, 6 o'clock, 5:30? What's best for everybody?
Six is better for me.
6. Okay, great. So I'm gonna say 6 o'clock. I'll find a conference room for that. I'll talk to Marianne about that. I almost said Barbara in the back of my head, but no, it's not Barbara, it's Marianne. So we'll, April 28th, wow, that was exciting. To, for our next meeting to dig into some of those other pieces. In the meantime, that'll give us all the time to make those changes and then put that into, I mean, this is the report, but we're gonna have to be working in the document, right?
I
So,
think we started doing that, didn't we?
Yeah, I don't know if they've made any changes since we got that last clean version.
Oh, yeah.
so we'll work on that.
Yeah.
Great. And then, we have one more item that just for us to discuss, the shrubbery ordinance. Did you all have a chance to take a look at that and the new minor change that, the city solicitor made? And were we okay with that? Yeah. So do we want to, send that back to, make a motion to send that back to council?
So moved.
Second.
Great. So we have a motion. Second, any further discussion? No, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, great. And then, at tomorrow's meeting, I'll set a public hearing, for that, and then we'll, present that.
Sure.
All right, very cool. Any other comment for the good of the order? No? I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Perfect. All right, thank you, everybody.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.